What's going on, workforce? Brian and Chris here, and today we're actually just kind of exploring the idea, especially about is all of Square Enix for sale. If you guys haven't seen the news, they have sold off the Western developers, Crystal Dynamics, Eidos, the IPs all associated with this. Rumors have been circulating that they've been trying to sell this off for a while. I think a lot of this has to do probably with Marvel's Avengers, but that's what we're going to talk about here today. But over on our Discord, we've actually got some information about the balance sheets of these companies, just in terms of just like a little bit of context reference for y'all later in this video. But like in our Discord, the conversation is literally like, is Sony, is Microsoft, is Tencent, like, is Square Enix gearing themselves up to be acquired? And if so, then by whom? And so we figured we'd discuss it here in today's video. We'd always like to know y'all's thoughts. So Chris, you obviously we're getting caught up on the news as you've been getting back into the swing of things this week. Does this news surprise you? What do you think overall? Like, is Square Enix getting ready to be acquired? What do you think?
I mean, this specific news surprises me, but we have been going through a season of restructuring within gaming.
Yeah.
Acquisitions, releasing assets. It's not always clear who kind of won the deal if it's not an equal deal. Like there's a lot of moving parts. The numbers behind them are really big. We're talking about an industry that still many of our parents don't consider anything beyond child's toys.
Right.
And these are billions of dollars worth of assets that are changing hands.
With the exception of this deal itself only being 300 million.
What shocked me about this deal was that the number was this small.
Yeah.
We haven't seen a lot of the major studios and publishers making deals of this size get much headlines because there's been deals of just such a bigger magnitude. And so I think, with Square Enix, obviously we're both big Square Enix fans. And so it's very easy for our bias to assume that anything that they make is out of solid gold. And so, there's been a lot of frustration around the way the initial Avengers titles released. And then there was this massive pivot, and it seemed like the Deus Ex group out of Canada was going to take it in kind of this new direction with the Guardians of the Galaxy game. But then it felt oddly familiar to the other Marvel games. And but you want to defend them because it's Square Enix, right? But it's not a Final Fantasy title. It's not Dragon Quest. It's not these franchises that have defined your childhood. They're just games that you want to succeed because they're made with a name that we care about. And it turns out many of them aren't worth much anymore relative to the other games we've seen change hands.
And that's a perfect way to transition. So we got kind of basically the balance sheets, etc., of both Eidos and Crystal Dynamics. And when you actually go look at net operating income, it ends up telling a picture that the company, while profitable, the margins that these companies were making so small. And what that means as a game, from a game development perspective, one of the things that we love the games that we love, but when a game bombs, it really hits hard. It tells me these numbers when I just kind of looked over them yesterday, and I was like, this is interesting. What it tells me is that you're one bad day away from, oh no, what happened? And they have 11,000, 1100 employees, right? So it's your operating costs are substantial. And so you have to hit hits, and then the hits take even more time. And so the other side of this story, I haven't seen a lot of people talking about it at all. And this is just the thought that keeps popping in my head, is that when we look at these IPs and these properties, and as to the greater conversation that we're having in this video, you're not seeing games as a service. You're not seeing recurring revenue. You're seeing, we make a game, we release a game, hopefully it does well, and then if it does, we make another game, and then we keep that model up. And I think when we look at, let's say Sony, right, with their announcement of they want to have at least 10 games as services games by 2025, and the thing is also on our bias, if for anybody who's watching this video has never followed our content, we play games as service games, we play MMORPGs, we're all in on games that continue to evolve and release content on some kind of schedule. So to say a games as a service is always bad, that's all I really generally spend my time with a handful of exceptions. But offloading this, I think, also sets themselves up for like a better, cleaner, recurring revenue. And that's what Square Enix even CEO kind of hints at, but he's doubling down on the NFTs and the, you know, which is, as gamers go, like a real big, like, all right,
I mean, within reason, right? So he's trusting the people that are in his circle to execute that. And so like Yoshida has come out and said,
no,
they're not coming into 14. And so like there's the ability to kind of draw those hard lines in places where we're most concerned about it. I think, you know, it's easy to say single player games and you name God of War and you name Elden Ring, which is
incredible.
You know, there's other players, but like it's truly, when you think of these games that people are really enjoying, you're naming the top echelon. I mean, that is like being, oh, you're a content creator, so you're like Asmongold or Ludwig.
Yes.
I also own a
just don't look at the number.
I guess
down
I'm
there.
Tom Brady. I mean, we both play the same number of professional games a year now. Like there's such a huge gap in the success stories of The Witcher, of Breath of the Wild, compared to just the general cost versus when you go look at these mobile games or these small games as a service that have 50 or 100 or 200,000 monthly active users, which is a number that the companies we're talking about, the publishers we're talking about, would be like, yeah, I mean, I guess 50,000 monthly active users is okay. Like, that's not really helping us. Like, 50,000 monthly active users doesn't change the direction of Blizzard. It doesn't even affect their trajectory.
Right.
But if you stop and think about how many people you have literally just come within 4 feet of in your entire life, like every time you've been in a train station or an airport, like 50,000 is a huge number of people. And for that number to be checking in with your game on a 28-day or 30-day cycle is insane. And that's a small game within the games as a service. And they can be giving not small amounts of money. When you think about what you and I have spent on games like Final Fantasy XIV, like World of Warcraft, where they have just continually asked us for small amounts of money in trade for continued development on a game, it's thousands of dollars per customer.
Right.
So I think that I can see why Square Enix wanted to do this, to feel responsible for 1,100 families when you are one, that sounds really great, man, choice to leadership, and then it ends terribly. Hey, you know, that choice that the creative director took with the next Deus Ex game, we're gonna have to lay 100 people off. Like, that's not a place you want to be dealing with. If you're trying to move into spaces where they are aware of the word microtransaction, they are aware of the word battle pass, and that seems to be aligning with their business model more. The question is, where do those games come? Because Tomb Raider is still a beloved franchise.
Yeah, you know, it's got value, right? Like, there is value in the IP. The question ends up being, and they're also working on a new Tomb Raider in Unreal 5. And that's actually some of the shock that I saw, is people like, why didn't Microsoft snatch this up? Why didn't Sony snatch this up? And then the reason is because it's not a healthy, like, these companies aren't healthy as they exist right now. And hopefully with this, that ends up maybe getting that ability to turn it around. You know, but yeah, like, they're working on a new Tomb Raider, and I hope that it is an incredible success. But I think essentially, like, it does feel like a part of the writing is on the wall. Yes, we will still get like a AAA single player game, and I think, yes, it will sell incredibly well, and yes, people will say, see, just make a really good game and people will buy it. But when you look at it in comparison to the likes of, like, any Destiny, like, that's what people are hungry for, is that monthly active users. And this, I think, does signal a shift or a continuation shift of what these companies are really after. Because if you have a game like Final Fantasy XIV, and one of the biggest complaints that I think we've all expressed as a community in generality, but I feel like it's a majority of view at some point, is that sometimes we feel like our support of Final Fantasy XIV is funding the other games when we want it to fund 14, but that's a Square Enix decision on how it manages its budget, right? So
Absolutely.
It's like okay, I hand you money and then you do whatever you want with it. I have no control over that money at that point. But however, you've heard it, I've heard it. People are like, oh yeah, Final Fantasy XIV funded 15. Final Fantasy XIV's funding 16. Yeah, and
Yeah.
that's the way it is, right? But like having a games as a service game, an MMORPG in your pocket that is generating that recurring revenue, I think allows them to take the risks to offset that cost. Because one of the things that in business that in the gaming conversation I never see brought up is the risk, and that risk cost I think has gotten bigger and bigger and bigger, especially as gaming has gotten as you've been probably subscription fatigued. I think that's a factor of it, right? Like, do you have the Hulu and the Netflix and the HBO and etc.? It's like at some point you're like, I can't hand anybody else any more money per month. It doesn't make any sense. I'm not even using these features. So it's like, I think within gaming, one of the things is that as we've seen all these like different kinds of payment models kind of come out, like I think what you're seeing is gamers becoming way more selective, which means that risk, that cost has increased, which means that, yeah, we could make that game that, will bring in $5 million for the company, or it won't, or it will cost us, $50 million, or we could make this other game and it has that chance to bring in that $5 million every month for the rest, for the next 20 years.
Yeah. You hit on a couple good points there. So when we talk about why Square-Enix dumps it, I think it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
When we talk about why Microsoft and Sony didn't pick it up, I think one other thing that we're not thinking about, because everybody they've picked up has not been just crushing it lately. They've picked up a variety of performers. But when somebody fetches that extra comma, those numbers that are hard to fathom, when you get into the billions, the other thing that those studios have been new IP that they can afford to take exclusive. And so they can afford to say, I don't know what it's going to make, but whatever it makes is all mine. And both Sony and Xbox have said, like, hey, if there's an established franchise like Tomb Raider, like these Marvel games, they will remain cross-platform as a promise and a continued support of the gaming community. But when you talk about new IP, things like Starfield, where you have a widely anticipated game that is basically only shown as a tire rolling across a lunar surface, and they're like, that's the game, and you're like, it's gonna be amazing. That is something that they can afford to weigh the calculus on taking it in-house and saying, you know what, we're going to go lock that behind a Game Pass or a PlayStation Plus, or it's only at least going to run on our console or something like that. So that kind of exclusive IP is something that when I looked at the titles that all went with the sale, it looked like a lot of titles that would remain cross-platform. And so if you are running narrow margins with a not insignificant amount of staff, of these highly specialized, talented individuals. So it's not like, oh, we'll just give them a new, different job, just pivot it, just adjust the company. Like, this is a working machine. They are turning a profit. They are doing a good job. These are great games. If you haven't played the Deus Ex games, I've really enjoyed them. But from there, how do you justify the cost when you're like, okay, but what if the next Tomb Raider game is great and I buy it on Xbox and it sells not a single copy of Game Pass and it doesn't drive a single person into Halo Infinite, which does get a whole new one map per year? Like, what? How do I justify that math when now I'm leaving those families at risk, but I didn't know them. So maybe my business decisions, I brought them in, I did what I could. If I have to lay them off, I have to lay them off. But now I'm putting the existing Microsoft family or the existing Sony family at risk, because that risk is going to overflow that pool. It's going to overflow that lack of margin, and it's going to come into my house. And so unless there's going to be something exclusive in it for me, as much as we don't like exclusives, exclusives make these deals happen.
So the other thought now as we pivot, because that's some really good points, is that who would be acquiring Square? And so we've been talking about this. We talked about this a little bit in Discord and on stream. And essentially, it comes down to, like, here's the thought, right? Like, I don't think Sony can compete with the numbers that Microsoft has available. And when it comes down to Square-Enix, they're a publicly traded company, which makes things that the board has to entertain offers and act in the best responsibility for their shareholders for that regards. However, Microsoft, with the Activision Blizzard closing, would have ESO and World of Warcraft as just like, if we just think about it in the MMO space. Part of me is like, I hope Sony is the one who could at least get this opportunity, with the idea of obviously continuing third party support.
Why is there not a Stadia MMO? Why would we have
Google,
an
man.
Xbox MMO? Why would we have an Xbox-owned MMO? At that point, let's assume a Sony-based MMO if they got 14.
Right.
An Amazon-based MMO. Like, why?
Because Google's Google, man.
Google's
like, they don't know
Google's
what
like,
they're
we got
doing.
some crazy tech.
They have crazy tech and they're not doing anything with it. An MMO is the perfect example of cloud-based technology because it's always online. People who already love MMOs like are already like, I'm playing this online. The barrier
is I don't have a PC.
Yeah. All right.
It's typically played by people that want good and reliable internet connections. So people are like, well, what about the people who live on a farm in North Dakota?
They're playing it in the first
MMOs.
Yeah.
Like, look, it's. Sorry.
Well, it's interesting because also Sony did sell off its MMOs because they had EverQuest, and so they sold off Daybreak, which was
this franchise will never go anywhere.
Well, and there's even rumors that they like EverQuest Next might be like still kind of trying to come out, you know. And I honestly I liked what they showed off with EverQuest Next. MMOs have been in this weird space, and honestly, it isn't really until this last year that we're seeing a resurgence of the genre itself. But like Sony, if
Square doesn't have to sell, just to be clear.
They don't have to, but like at some point, if they get
an unsolicited offer, like Elon to Twitter,
mm-hmm.
there is an interesting point. So a while back, I was offered an opportunity to sit down and talk about an amount of money to do something that I had never really thought of doing. And it made me value, well, what would it cost to what's the life-changing number? Now, I went into that meeting and the life-changing number that I came up with was not aligned with the number they thought. They thought, oh, you already want this thing you never asked for, and you're going to come to it for pennies on the dollar. We're going to get a bargain out of you. And so it ended up being a non-starter. But it was an interesting exercise to stop and ask yourself, what would it cost to move your family across the country? What would it cost to change industries? What would it cost? Like, is there a number where you're like, you know what? It would make so many other parts of my life come together.
Right.
And it may not just be money, right? It might be a location. It might be time off work. But total compensation. What is the package that makes you move to something else that you're qualified to do, you would feel satisfied doing, but you'd never thought of doing? That's what happened with Twitter, right? They got offered an amount of money, and then they had to go to the board. They had to say, does he align with our business model? Because it's not just a dollar number. Do we think some of these people are like, yeah, I want to get paid out, but I'm going to hold on to some of this stock in this company. So is he going to drive the rest of my stock into the ground? I don't know that I want to sell out. So you have to ask all these questions. So do they think that Microsoft, A, is their number big enough if they offer a number? B, is that who they think they're aligned with? Because Sony and Square have been
very close,
have been super buddies,
buddies.
Like a happy hour,
couple
days a week.
Right.
They have been good friends for a long time.
Which is interesting because Sony moved its headquarters pretty much to California, so it's like to maintain that relationship. I think obviously is probably something that's gonna be interesting. The other side of this coin, though, is when we talk about buddies, like how much is them butting up with Square-Enix right now to lock in these contracts so that if Microsoft is the acquisitioner, so that they still publish games on PlayStation like they're doing with like the other games that they released this last year. So like Microsoft's like, well, we bought them. Oh, they had deals with Sony. Okay, we're gonna honor those deals, right? Like, I wonder, like, again, I don't know if it's going to be Sony or if it's going to be Microsoft or if it's going to be Google. Google would be the weirdest thing out. Like, they've been just kind of like screwing around doing who knows what. Amazon is also like is somebody that I could consider, especially with the recent successes that they've had, and whether they're going to pursue publishing deals or what have you. Like, I could see them come also at least if nothing else, putting out an offer. Like, if all of a sudden it's like, hey, Sony's offering to buy Square-Enix, like, oh wait, like do we throw our our best bid in the ring? Like whenever you're bidding on a house, right? Like, all right, guys, put in your best bids and your note about how you're going to raise your family here and your kids. Like buying a house, guys. If you haven't done it in the last like 10 years, it's getting ridiculous. Like, we got to write some kind of love story about how you love the house, and then
you have to justify why somebody's not just taking the cash offer. Why am I waiting on your loan to close?
Yeah,
that's way harder. So I don't know. I think Sony would be my guess. I think Microsoft would throw out a number. The other question is, like, how much money does Phil really have to spend annually? Like, I understand that his war chest is big, but like he has to check in with the shareholders quarterly. So how often is he willing to go back and go, yeah, we got a big savings account, but like, I can't spend it all in one quarter.
Yeah.
So he's got to show dividends on these deals he's already closed. If this Blizzard deal hasn't gone all the way through yet.
Not yet. And they've reached another milestone. So, but that's gonna mean this time next year.
Milestones, but like these things do fall apart. I think it's been really great for Blizzard. So if this whole thing makes it out the other end, and then Activision dumps Blizzard on its own, and it doesn't go to Microsoft, like,
right.
Thanks for the like free marital counseling and cleaning my life up. Like, we super cleaned the house. Got myself mentally healthy. Got my credit cards paid off. I feel good.
Feeling good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think that's like, because we've seen leadership change. We've seen games changing direction. We're seeing them make announcements that are starting to feel like, if it weren't for all the bad taste in our mouth, this is like Blizzard of old. I'm not unhappy. So Sony's my guess.
My final thought on it is that if Sony continues their like PlayStation and like, hey, yeah, we're gonna bring it to PlayStation and PC and have that mentality so that like it's not locked into hardware. Because if Microsoft says it's only coming to Xbox, then I'm gonna be very upset, right? Because they've stated this. And if Sony continues to release their games so that you don't have to buy a PlayStation, but I could still pay for PlayStation Plus now, premium, whatever, and still be a part of that ecosystem, I'd happily do that. Like I just give me the option to play where I want, and that makes me happy. And so if that's the case, and they kind of have that mindset, I think honestly, it's the best bet for gamers is Sony, because then we have competition between Game Pass and whatever Sony is working on offering. And I think competition ends up helping make sure that like one company doesn't get so out of a line that it's like, oh yeah, there's no way that they can compete. Because competition, I think, helps keep price, helps create innovation, and it helps overall the gamers and themselves, rather than not feel like they're kind of locked into one ecosystem. But that's just my thought. However, I think it is going to be interesting, and I think if anything does happen, it's going to happen in the next 2 years. If it doesn't, if Square-Enix is still like on their own and crushing it and independent in 2 years, that's awesome. That's going to be really interesting to see. But if it happens, I feel it's 2 years. Final thoughts, Chris?
No, I think it's exciting for everybody involved. Hopefully this gives Deus Ex and Tomb Raider and all of those other franchises a new life and a new direction, where they can have somebody that invests in them and aligns with their business. Hopefully this helps Square align more with their business model. I know it's very frustrating for 14 fans to see all the success and see that money go somewhere else. But I mean, that is Square's prerogative, right? My wife's been crushing it at work, and if she wants to spend that money on a garden or vacation or whatever, her job they don't have anything to say about that.
Right.
So like we give that money over in trade for services rendered, and then they can spend it however they want. They can yeet it into the void. They can be like, oh yeah, we have this bonfire in the back.
We send it over to the 13th
$10
shard.
bill every second, every day. Like,
we take your money, we throw it on the 13th as a pile, and we sacrifice it to the.
They can do whatever they want, but I think, in general, I'm just trying to remain excited about all the movement in gaming, because the dollars and cents here, while this number's not billions, it's still a big number relative, to what people think of gaming.
I've never seen $300 million.
And so I do think it's exciting to constantly be reminded that like there are a lot of people in this world that see value in gaming. And so sometimes, as I've gone and spent a lot of time with family, I can feel alone in a room because nobody understands the passion that we share for this hobby or whatever this is. But there are a lot of people that do, and they see real value in it, and they're willing to put their money where their mouth is.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, guys, let us know your thoughts, any and all. Sony, Microsoft, Amazon. If Google comes out of the woodworks and decides to buy a studio and close them down again,
never sell. Diamond hands.
All right, guys, thanks so much for watching. We'll see you in our next video, but until then,
take care.